We will now interrupt your regularly scheduled programming for this Good Old Blades micro podcast.
We're entering into a strange time in knife craft because, we have economic downturn and issues in the United States. We've all suffered from a global pandemic in COVID, and the social media conglomerates are making it ever more difficult as well. And it's become ever more apparent to me each knife show I go to and talking to other makers when we're actually speaking candidly. And the reality is that sales suck. And I think that it's negatively impacting knife makers' creativity and the engine that has been created and sustained probably for the better part of 20 years. And let me kind of go into a little bit more detail on that. Bruce Bump told me that there's, in knife making, there's feast and famine and a lot of famine. And I know from other knife makers who have sustained the industry for the last 30 plus years that there are always times of trial and tribulation. But I think that it's coming to a head in some ways, and here's kind of where I'm concerned. At Blade Show Texas, I noticed a lot of phenomenal knife makers. People that you would not assume have any type of problems. Not like they didn't sell a single knife, or ones who have usually sold real well at shows and rely on shows for their livelihood has sold a bare minimum. And I'm not going to disclose names, but I usually go and talk to people and try to at least in my head pull what's going on in the industry. And I have to say that sales are slow, and depending on who you are. And if you have a phenomenal and loyal customer base that continuously buy up your knives, then you might not have a problem. But for a lot of makers, and I would actually include myself in that, where there's not a phenomenal continuous following of customers, that there are a lot of issues that keep us from selling knives regularly, and especially going to shows. It seems to be at a downturn as well. Now, obviously, economy has a lot to do with it. There's not as much disposable income, so you have to pick and choose where your money goes. And don't get me wrong, if I'm selling a $400 knife, I understand that even for myself, spending $400+ on anything is more of a burden. Grocery prices are higher, gas prices are higher, the cost of living in general is higher. And so knives that I sell typically are considered a luxury item. However, what I've also noticed as a corollary to this is that a lot of makers will follow trends. So if they see that buoys are popular, or drop point hunters are popular, or certain types of slip joints or other pocket knives are popular, from a design or aesthetic perspective, I see more and more makers gravitating towards what sells and not necessarily what's cool or what's internal to them. And that market, having knife makers and craftsmen gravitate towards what's popular versus the self-expression that they have in the knife medium, to me is a detriment to us all. I mean, you think about Buster Orensky and other makers, and if popularity was the only motivation for their craft, we would not have the King Tut knife. We would not have the amazing works of Delana and Van Barnett and all of the areas that they've pushed themselves into that really open up the craft and our imagination to all things possible. We wouldn't have Grace Horn and her selling her scissors and everything, which, by far, she's one of the most predominant knife makers that turned making scissors, and they're amazing. And I think about artists pushing into those areas and taking the insane amount of risk in not being able to sell their products. And for a lot of people, that is the state of the union. Selling knives is encumbering creativity. And you might agree or disagree with me, but I'm seeing an overall trend where the things that are interesting in life, the things that are intriguing, are done by the brave and those who have the money to invest in failure. And what I mean by failure is not that the work is not a failure, but the ability to sell it, recoup the cost, and roll it back into the business is a potential failure. And all of that greatly affects a knife maker, especially full-time knife makers, which I have many friends who have gone full-time with the market trends going where they were just into the pandemic. And I really feel very strongly that all of us are at risk in some ways of the craft, and not being able to continue or having to slow down because the market's just not there. And I understand that general opinion might be there's more than enough customers to go around, but I also see that there are a lot of customers not at certain areas where I would expect them to. Taking myself out of that, I see a lot of great makers that are not able to sell knives, and it has nothing to do with them or their product. So, kind of on that note, if you love this craft, and if you love knife makers, and if you support them, their lives in the craft, then I implore you to think seriously about not just buying their knives because they're cool, but investing in them because the next thing that they come up with is the pushing the envelope. The next thing that they come up with is something that continues their craft, where they can sustain this period of time where it's tough for them. Those knife makers that are going full-time or have gone full-time in the hopes that that momentum would continue, if they don't have your support, then they have a high likelihood of failure because there's not a lot of stability in knives already. There's not a lot of stability in crafts in general, especially with what we do with knives, leather work, gunsmithing, making tactical like knuckles and things like that. Any type of situation where there's handmade anything, there's a lot of upfront costs, sweat equity, and risk involved with that. And I think it's important for us to be able to rally around those knife makers and support them, and leather crafts and things like that, and throw them our business when we can. That's especially important for knife makers like me, where if I have sheaths or other things that I can have somebody else make, even though I could technically make them myself, I will rather take that money and invest it with others to give them a small cut of what my eventual profits are, because it's important to share the wealth. It's important to support each other and to make sure that we can sustain this period of downturn. Now, I know in 5 years it might be different. The economic situation might be in an overall upturn, but lots of businesses closed down during COVID, never to reopen because the sustainability of the business was impractical and almost impossible. And a lot of these businesses are shut down for good because of a short period of time of turbulence. And there's a lot of knife makers that have to make those same decisions. Once a knife maker decides that they have to go and get a regular job or more stability in a regular 9 to 5 or whatever, it's a lot more difficult for them to get back to it, if at all, because of that economic turbulence. So if you see makers, support them. Sometimes you will not realize the impact that you make to a maker by just simply buying their wares or talking to them about commissions or things like that. There's a lot of us who are not turning down work because of the economy. And I am blessed to have a full-time job that supports my family and everything. It allows me to make some riskier decisions and to play the field a little bit differently. But there's a lot of makers that will not say anything about it, but they need the help and they need the support. So, keep an eye out, because a few $100s in a knife maker's pocket makes an awful lot of difference on keeping the lights on for another month. And if you like a maker's work, if you like who they are and what they believe in and everything, I would highly recommend supporting them. I hope this helps give you some perspective, and let's all come together and boost this industry up and make sure that we show the love where we can.